I walked into my son's backyard and heard, "Why is she even still alive?" I didn't leave. I went. My name is Diana, and at 67 years old, I never expected to hear those words about me. After losing my husband Robert 5 years ago, my son Tyler and his family became my world. That Sunday afternoon, I decided to surprise them with a visit. As I approached the side gate, I heard laughter from the backyard, then those devastating words floating through the air. Why is she even still alive? The question pierced my heart like a knife. I stood frozen, my hand trembling on the gate. Every instinct told me to run away, but something stronger made me stay. Instead of retreating, I straightened my back and walked forward. Let me share where you're watching from, and hit that subscribe button before I tell you what happened when I walked inside. I had built what I thought was a beautiful life with Robert. We were married for 45 years, a journey that began when we were both barely 20. He was the solid, dependable man who supported me through my 32-year career as an elementary school teacher. Together, we raised 3 wonderful children who made us incredibly proud. Tyler, our middle child, was always the responsible one. Even as a little boy, he looked out for his older sister Stephanie and younger brother James. He had his father's kind eyes and my stubborn determination. When he married Abigail 10 years ago, I felt like I was gaining a daughter rather than losing a son. They settled just 20 minutes from our family home, and I watched with joy as they built their lives and gave me my precious grandchildren, Emma and Nathan. Then came the darkest day of my life. Robert and I had just finished dinner. He complained of indigestion, then collapsed at the kitchen table. Despite the ambulance arriving within minutes, my beloved husband was gone before we reached the hospital. A massive heart attack, they said. No warning. No goodbye. The grief was overwhelming. Our home, once filled with laughter and comfortable silences, became a mausoleum of memories. Every corner held a reminder of the life we built together. The early days after the funeral were a blur of casseroles from neighbors and tearful visits from friends. But eventually, the visitors stopped coming, and I was left alone with my grief. Tyler became my lifeline. While Stephanie lived on the opposite coast with her career in finance and James traveled internationally for work, Tyler was close by, steady and available. At first, his support felt natural. He would check in daily, bring the children for weekend visits, and invite me for family dinners. Abigail would cook my favorite meals and ask for my recipes, making me feel valued and needed. But over time, something subtle began to shift. I found myself calling Tyler more frequently, sometimes late at night when the silence in my house became too loud. I started showing up at their house unannounced, bringing treats for the grandchildren, or offering to help with housework. In my mind, I was being helpful. Looking back, I can see I was desperately trying to fill the void Robert left. I first noticed something was wrong about 6 months ago. I arrived at their house to babysit as planned, but Abigail seemed surprised to see me. "Was that today?" she asked, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. Tyler quickly intervened, saying they had forgotten but were grateful I was there so they could still make their dinner reservation. As the weeks passed, I noticed more cancellations. "Emma has a fever," Abigail would say. Or Tyler has to work late. The weekly family dinners became bi-weekly, then monthly. When I did visit, I occasionally caught snippets of whispered arguments between them. "We need to talk about your mother," Abigail would say, her voice low but tense. "Not now," Tyler would respond, cutting her off when he noticed me nearby. The grandchildren started acting differently too. 8-year-old Emma, who used to run into my arms, became reserved. 6-year-old Nathan still showed affection, but sometimes said things that struck me as odd. "Mommy says we need to be extra patient with you," he told me once while we were baking cookies. When I asked what he meant, he just shrugged and said, "Because you're sad a lot." I dismissed these warning signs. Surely I was overthinking things. Tyler and Abigail were just busy with their lives. The children were growing up and naturally becoming more independent. The changes in their behavior toward me were probably just my imagination, a product of my loneliness. I never considered that I might have become a burden. In my mind, I was the helpful mother and grandmother, the experienced matriarch offering wisdom and support. It never occurred to me that my presence might be draining rather than enriching their lives. So I continued calling when I felt lonely. I kept visiting when I craved connection. I offered advice when I thought they needed it, all the while completely blind to the resentment building behind their polite smiles and gentle reassurances. That Sunday began like any other day in my quiet, empty house. I woke up reaching for Robert, forgetting for that brief moment between sleep and wakefulness that he was gone. The disappointment was familiar now, a dull ache rather than the sharp pain of the early days. I went through my usual morning routine, making coffee for one, and reading the newspaper at the kitchen table that still felt too large. The house echoed with silence, occasionally interrupted by the ticking of the grandfather clock Robert had lovingly restored years ago. By mid-morning, the loneliness was creeping in at the edges of my consciousness. I thought about calling Tyler, but remembered he had mentioned they had plans for the weekend. He hadn't invited me to join, and I hadn't asked. Perhaps I should have respected that boundary, but as I pulled out the ingredients for Robert's famous apple pie, an idea took hold. "I'll surprise them," I told myself, smiling as I imagined the children's delight at the unexpected treat. Everyone loves a surprise visit from Grandma, especially when she brings pie. I worked methodically peeling apples the way Robert had taught me, adding the precise amount of cinnamon and nutmeg that made his recipe special, as the pie baked, filling the house with its warm, comforting aroma. I imagined the appreciation on Abigail's face, the way Tyler would close his eyes with pleasure at the first bite, just like his father used to do. By early afternoon, the pie was cooling on the rack, and I was changing into my favorite blue blouse, the one Emma once said made my eyes look like the sky on the best day for playground time. I applied a light touch of makeup, brushed my silver hair until it shone, and practiced my brightest smile in the bathroom mirror. "You're just bringing pie to your family," I told my reflection. "This isn't an imposition. They'll be happy to see you." The 20-minute drive to Tyler's neighborhood was pleasant. It was one of those perfect spring days with cherry blossoms lining the streets and children playing in front yards. Their suburban community was filled with young families, manicured lawns, and friendly neighbors who waved as you drove past. It had always reminded me of the neighborhood where Robert and I raised our children. As I turned onto their street, I noticed several unfamiliar cars parked outside their house. My first thought was concern, wondering if something was wrong that warranted so many visitors. Then I considered that they might be hosting a gathering they hadn't mentioned to me. A small voice in my head suggested I should turn around and go home, that I was intruding on plans that intentionally didn't include me. I silenced that voice. I was family, not an intruder. Besides, I had brought pie, a contribution to whatever gathering was taking place. I parked a few houses down and carefully lifted the still warm pie from the passenger seat. Instead of going to the front door, I headed for the side gate that led directly to the backyard, my usual route when visiting. Tyler had long ago given me permission to just come around back rather than waiting at the front door. As I approached, I could hear the murmur of conversation and occasional laughter, the sounds of a normal, pleasant gathering. I shifted the pie to one hand, reaching for the gate latch with the other, when a woman's voice, clear and distinctive, cut through the ambient noise. "Why is she even still alive? She's draining them financially and emotionally." I recognized the voice immediately as belonging to Patricia Abigail's mother. We had never been particularly close, but I had always thought we maintained a cordial relationship for the sake of our shared grandchildren. My hand froze on the gate latch as another voice responded, one I was shocked to recognize as Carol, a woman I had considered a friend. We had taught together for years before retirement. "I know what you mean," Carol said, her voice carrying easily in the quiet neighborhood air. "Diana has become so needy since Robert died. She calls Tyler at all hours. Abigail told me she's considering changing their phone number." I felt as though the ground beneath my feet had suddenly disappeared. My chest tightened painfully, and I had to lean against the fence to steady myself. But worse was yet to come. "Tyler, you need to set firmer boundaries with your mother." This was Patricia again, her tone authoritative. "Abigail is at her breaking point." I held my breath, waiting, hoping for my son to defend me. His response when it came was weak and hesitant. I know. It's just... she's been through a lot, and she's still my mom. Being your mother doesn't give her the right to hijack your lives." Abigail's voice now tight with frustration. "The late night calls, the surprise visits, the constant need for attention. Last week, she called at midnight because she heard a noise. Tyler drove over there in his pajamas only to find it was the refrigerator making ice." A ripple of laughter followed this story. My face burned with shame. It was true I had called Tyler about a noise. I had been genuinely frightened alone in that big house, startled awake by a sound I couldn't identify. Was it so wrong to reach out to my son when I was afraid? The conversation continued oblivious to my presence on the other side of the fence. "Have you looked into assisted living options?" asked a male voice I didn't recognize. "We've toured a few places." Tyler admitted, his voice heavy with guilt. "Sunrise Gardens has a nice community for active seniors. The problem is getting her to agree to it." "She doesn't need to agree," Patricia said firmly. "At some point, you have to make decisions for elderly parents when they can't make good ones for themselves." Elderly. The word struck me like a physical blow. Is that how they saw me? Elderly, incompetent, a problem to be managed? I was only 67, still healthy and sharp, still capable of living independently. My first instinct was to flee, to take my foolish pie and my wounded heart back to my empty house, where at least no one was talking about me behind my back. My legs actually began to move, taking one step backward, then another. But something stopped me. A memory of Robert, his voice clear in my mind. Diana running from painful truths never made them less true. It only gives them power over you. I took a deep breath, feeling the cool spring air fill my lungs. Then, still clutching my apple pie, I unlatched the gate and stepped into my son's backyard. The conversation stopped abruptly as I entered the backyard. 8 pairs of eyes turned to me in shock faces, frozen in expressions ranging from surprise to horror. The colorful patio, decorated with spring flowers and string lights, suddenly felt like a stage where I was the unexpected and unwelcome performer. Patricia and Harold, Abigail's parents, sat rigidly in their chairs. Carol, my supposed friend, had a hand halfway to her mouth, as if to physically stop her words from having been spoken. Next to her was her husband, Doug, looking everywhere but at me. The Wilsons from across the street. John and Megan smiled awkwardly. Tyler stood by the grill, spatula in hand, his face drained of color. Abigail sat at the patio table, a glass of wine frozen halfway to her lips. "Diana." Patricia finally broke the silence, her voice falsely bright. "What a surprise." "Clearly," I said, surprised by the steadiness of my own voice. I walked forward and placed the pie on the patio table. "I brought dessert." No one moved. No one seemed to know what to say. In the heavy silence, I could hear children's laughter from inside the house, where Emma and Nathan were presumably playing, blissfully unaware of the tension in the backyard. "Mom!" Tyler finally spoke, taking a step toward me. "How long were you—" "Long enough," I said, looking directly at him. "Long enough to hear that I'm a burden, that I'm draining you financially and emotionally, that you're planning to put me in a home." Abigail's eyes filled with tears. "Diana, you weren't supposed to hear that." "Clearly," I repeated the single word carrying the weight of my hurt. "But I did hear it, and I think I deserve to know what's being said about me when I'm not around." "Now, Diana," Patricia began in a condescending tone, "you're taking things out of context." "Am I?" I turned to face her. "Why is she even still alive?" "Those were your exact words, Patricia. I'd love to hear the context that makes that acceptable." Patricia at least had the grace to look ashamed. "I didn't mean it literally. I was expressing frustration about the situation." "The situation being me, my existence." Tyler finally moved to my side. "Mom, please sit down. Let's talk about this calmly." I allowed him to guide me to a chair, aware that my legs were not entirely steady. The shock was wearing off, leaving a cold, sick feeling in the pit of my stomach. "I want to understand," I said, looking around at the group. "I want to know exactly what I've done to become such a burden." The uncomfortable silence stretched on until Abigail finally spoke, her words coming in a rush, as if a dam had broken. "It's not just one thing, Diana. It's everything. The constant calls, the unannounced visits, the way you make Tyler feel responsible for your happiness." She took a deep breath. "We have our own lives, our own problems. Did you know we're struggling financially? Tyler's company downsized last year and his new position pays less. We've had to dip into our savings just to cover the mortgage." This was news to me. "Why didn't you tell me?" Tyler looked down. "I didn't want you to worry. Instead, you let me think everything was fine while you resented my presence in your lives." "We don't resent you," Tyler said quickly. "We love you. It's been a lot. The midnight calls when you're lonely or scared. The expectation that we drop everything when you need something." Carol, perhaps trying to be helpful, chimed in. "Diana, honey, grief can make us blind to how our behavior affects others. After my sister lost her husband, she became very dependent on her daughter. It took a family intervention to help her see what she was doing." I turned to her, the betrayal stinging afresh. "And is that what this gathering was, an intervention you were all planning for me?" "No," Tyler insisted. "It was just a barbecue. The conversation just happened." A conversation about putting me in Sunrise Gardens without my knowledge or consent. Harold, who had been silent until now, spoke up. "Tyler and Abigail mentioned they've been touring some retirement communities. It came up naturally in conversation. They're concerned about you being alone in that big house." "Concerned?" I repeated the word, tasting bitter. "Concerned enough to discuss my future behind my back, but not concerned enough to include me in the conversation." I looked at Tyler. "Did it ever occur to you that I might be open to downsizing, that I might welcome a change if it was presented as a choice rather than a sentence?" The guilty look on his face told me it hadn't. "And the financial burden," I continued. "What exactly am I costing you? I pay for my own groceries, my own bills. I even buy gifts for the children." Abigail sighed. "It's not direct financial cost, Diana. It's time. It's emotional energy. It's Tyler taking time off work to check on noises in your house. It's the stress of trying to meet your emotional needs while balancing our own lives." As she spoke, I saw Emma peering out from the sliding glass door, her young face concerned. She pushed the door open and stepped onto the patio. "Grandma," she said hesitantly, "are you mad at Daddy and Mommy?" Before I could answer, Nathan bounded out behind her. "Grandma brought pie," he exclaimed, oblivious to the tension. The innocence of the children broke through the heaviness of the moment. I forced a smile for them. "No, Emma, I'm not mad. Grown-ups just need to have serious talk sometimes." About Grandma going to live in the old people place, Nathan asked, confirming they had heard more than their parents realized. 8 adults exchanged uncomfortable glances. "We're just talking about options," Tyler said quickly. "Nothing is decided." I looked at my grandchildren, then at the circle of adults who had been discussing my fate. With as much dignity as I could muster, I stood up. "I think I should go now. You all can continue your discussion without the awkwardness of my presence." "Mom, please don't leave like this," Tyler pleaded. "I think it's for the best," I said, my voice remarkably steady despite the earthquake happening inside me. "I've heard how you all feel. I need time to process it. And perhaps you're right. Perhaps I have been too dependent. That ends today." I looked at each person in turn, ending with Abigail. "I wish you had told me directly how you felt. I wish you had given me the chance to address your concerns before they reached this point. But I respect your feelings even if I'm hurt by the way I discovered them." With that, I walked back through the gate, leaving my apple pie behind on the table. I made it to my car before the first tear fell. The drive home passed in a blur. My vision swam with tears, and at one point, I had to pull over because I couldn't see the road clearly. A car honked as it swerved around me. The driver probably assuming I was an impaired elderly driver who shouldn't be on the road. Perhaps they were right. I sat in the pulled-over car, gripping the steering wheel as if it might anchor me to reality. The words I had overheard played on repeat in my mind. Why is she even still alive? The casual cruelty of the question kept hitting me anew, each repetition like a fresh slap. Eventually, I managed to compose myself enough to continue driving. When I pulled into my driveway, the house I had shared with Robert for 4 decades looked different, somehow more forbidding. No longer a home, but a mausoleum's silent testimony to a life that had ended not just for Robert, but in many ways for me as well. Inside, I moved through the rooms like a ghost. The phone rang, Tyler's name flashing on the caller ID. I let it go to voicemail. It rang again 5 minutes later, and again I ignored it. Eventually, the ringing stopped. As evening fell, I found myself sitting in Robert's chair, surrounded by photographs of a life I had thought was filled with love and connection. There was Tyler, graduating from college, Robert and I beaming proudly on either side of him. There was Emma as a newborn, my finger caught in her tiny grasp. There was the family vacation to the beach 3 years ago, one of the last trips before Robert died. Had it all been a lie? Had my children merely tolerated me? Had I been blind to their resentment all these years? Or was this something new born of my behavior after losing Robert? I picked up a photo of Robert and me on our 40th anniversary. "What would you tell me to do?" I whispered to his smiling image. The silence of the empty house was my only answer. The darkness outside deepened, matching my mood. I didn't bother turning on lights. What was the point? The house remained silent, except for the occasional ping of a text message arriving on my phone, which I continued to ignore. For the first time since Robert died, I found myself questioning whether life was worth the pain. If I was such a burden to those I loved most, what purpose did my continued existence serve? The thought frightened me with its darkness, its finality. In the deepest part of that night, sitting alone in the dark, I reached a level of despair I had never known before, not even in the raw early days after Robert's death. Then, at least, I had felt surrounded by love and support. Now, I felt utterly alone, unwanted, unnecessary. My gaze fell on the bottle of sleeping pills in the bathroom cabinet. For a brief, terrifying moment, I considered them as an escape from the pain. The thought shocked me back to awareness. This wasn't me. This darkness wasn't who I was. Almost desperately, I moved to Robert's study, a room I had largely kept closed since his death. His presence felt strongest here among his books and papers. I switched on the lamp and looked around at the space that had been so uniquely his. On his desk sat a leather-bound journal I had given him for his 60th birthday. He had used it sporadically, mostly for reflections and memories he wanted to preserve. I had never read it, respecting his privacy, even after death. But now, seeking some connection to him, some guidance, I opened it. I flipped through pages of his neat handwriting until an entry from about a year before his death caught my eye. "Diana amazes me," he had written. "After the difficulties with Tyler's job loss and move last year, many women would have fallen apart or smothered their child with help. Not my Diana. She offered support without taking over. She respects boundaries while remaining completely available when needed. Her strength has always been her ability to love without possession, to care without controlling. It's what made her an excellent teacher, an outstanding mother, and the only woman I could have spent my life with." Tears fell onto the page, smudging the ink slightly. This was how Robert had seen me, a strong, respectful woman who understood boundaries. When had I lost that part of myself? When had grief transformed me from that woman into someone so needy that my own family discussed whether my continued existence was worthwhile? As dawn broke, pale light filtering through the study windows, I made a decision. I would not be defined by others' perceptions of me, not even my beloved son's. I would find the woman Robert had described in his journal, the woman I had been before grief rewrote my story. And I would write a new chapter, one where I was neither a burden nor an afterthought, but a woman of purpose and dignity, living a life of meaning. The first rays of sunlight touched my face, and for the first time since overhearing those devastating words, I felt a spark of hope. This pain could destroy me, or it could transform me. The choice, I realized, was entirely mine. The first week after the backyard incident, I maintained my isolation. I let Tyler's calls go to voicemail. I read his increasingly worried texts, but didn't respond. I needed this time alone to process not just what I had heard, but who I had become. On the third day, I forced myself to listen to Tyler's voicemails. His voice cracked with emotion as he apologized, explaining they had been under financial stress. I knew nothing about that. They did love me, but felt overwhelmed. He begged me to call back to give them a chance to make things right. I wasn't ready. The wound was still too raw, the betrayal too fresh. I needed to understand myself before I could begin to rebuild relationships with others. So I sat with my pain. I allowed myself to feel the full weight of it without rushing to forgiveness or reconciliation. I cried when I needed to cry. I raged when anger surfaced, throwing a coffee mug against the wall in a moment of pure fury, watching it shatter like my illusions about my place in my family's lives. By the end of that week, I began to see patterns in my behavior since Robert's death. How my grief had made me increasingly dependent. How I had transferred all my emotional needs to Tyler and his family. How I had called late at night, not because I truly heard threatening noises, but because the silence of the empty house became unbearable at times. I pulled out my calendar and counted how many times I had visited Tyler's family in the past month. 12 visits, nearly every other day. No wonder Abigail felt overwhelmed. I thought of the times I had offered unsolicited advice on everything from how she should discipline the children to how she should organize her kitchen cabinets. I cringed at the memory. "Oh, Diana," I said aloud to the empty room. "What have you become?" The answer was uncomfortable but necessary. I had become someone whose identity was wrapped up entirely in being needed. a teacher who no longer had students, a wife who no longer had a husband, a mother whose children were grown. I had clung to the grandmother role with increasing desperation, forcing myself into their lives rather than waiting to be invited in. That realization was the turning point. Once I understood the pattern, I could begin to change it. I could rebuild an identity based not on who needed me, but on who I was at my core. The following Monday, I picked up the phone and called Susan, a former colleague from school who had repeatedly invited me to join her book club after Robert died. I had always declined, claiming I wasn't ready for social activities. "Diana," she exclaimed when she heard my voice, "what a lovely surprise." "Susan, does your book club still have room for one more?" I asked, surprising myself with how steady my voice sounded. "Always room for you. We're meeting this Thursday at 7. We're discussing The Dutch House. Have you read it?" I hadn't, but I promised to start it immediately. After hanging up, I felt a small sense of accomplishment. One small step toward rebuilding a life independent of my role as Tyler's mother. That same day, I looked up the local community center's schedule and discovered they offered swimming classes for seniors on Tuesday and Thursday mornings. I had always enjoyed swimming, but hadn't been in a pool since Robert died. I signed up for the next session. The following week brought more steps forward. I attended an information session at the local library about their literacy volunteer program, where retirees helped adults learning to read English. My years as an elementary teacher made me a natural fit, and by the end of the session, I had committed to 2 afternoons a week. I also finally gathered the courage to attend a grief support group at the community church. Robert had been gone for 5 years, but I realized my grief had become stagnant, turning inward and souring into dependency, rather than processing in healthy ways. Sitting in a circle with others who understood loss, I spoke honestly about my experiences for the first time. No one judged me. Some nodded in recognition of their own similar struggles. As my calendar began to fill with activities unrelated to Tyler's family, I made an appointment with a financial advisor. Robert had always handled our finances, and after his death, I had continued making the same routine payments without really understanding our overall financial picture. The meeting was eye-opening. Between Robert's life insurance, his pension, my teacher's pension, and our investments, I was in a much stronger financial position than I had realized. I wasn't wealthy, but I was secure with enough resources to maintain my independence for the foreseeable future. "Have you considered downsizing?" the advisor asked. "That house must be expensive to maintain, and the equity could provide additional security." Unlike when Tyler and Abigail had apparently discussed it behind my back, this suggestion felt empowering rather than threatening, because it came as part of an overall strategy for my independence, not as a solution to me being a problem. "I think I'm ready to consider it," I replied, surprised at how the idea now appealed to me. The big house held memories, but it also held me in patterns of the past. By the end of the first month of my self-imposed separation from Tyler's family, I had established a new routine: swimming on Tuesday and Thursday mornings, literacy tutoring Monday, and Wednesday afternoons book club every other Thursday evening, grief support group on Friday nights. I was busy engaged and slowly rebuilding a sense of self that didn't depend on being needed by my children. I still missed my grandchildren terribly. Some nights I cried myself to sleep thinking of Emma's serious little face or Nathan's exuberant hugs. But I knew that before I could be the grandmother they deserved, I needed to become a whole person again, not just a needy extension of their family unit. The path wasn't always smooth. There were days when loneliness hit me like a physical pain when I reached for the phone to call Tyler before forcing myself to put it down. There were moments when I questioned whether this separation was punishing them more than healing me. But deep down, I knew this process was necessary not just for me, but for all of us. As spring turned to summer, I began to recognize glimpses of the woman Robert had described in his journal. Independent, strong, capable of loving without smothering. The journey back to her was difficult, but with each passing day, I felt more like myself than I had in the 5 years since Robert's death. On a warm day in July, nearly 6 weeks after the backyard incident, I was leaving the library after my tutoring session when I spotted Tyler across the parking lot. He was getting out of his car, clearly having just arrived. This wasn't a coincidence. He must have known my schedule. For a moment, I considered turning back into the library to avoid him. But that would be the old Diana, the one who ran from difficult conversations. The new Diana I was becoming would face this moment with dignity. I waited by my car as he approached, noting how tired he looked, the dark circles under his eyes, the slump in his shoulders that hadn't been there before. "Mom," he said when he reached me, his voice thick with emotion. "Tyler," I responded, keeping my voice neutral. "Please," he said. "Can we talk? Maybe get a coffee somewhere?" I considered his request. 6 weeks of silence had given me time to process my feelings to begin rebuilding my sense of self. Perhaps it was time to hear him out. "There's a coffee shop around the corner," I said. "I can spare half an hour." Relief washed over his face. "Thank you." We walked in silence to the small cafe. Once seated with our drinks, an uncomfortable silence fell between us. Tyler stared into his coffee as if it might contain the words he needed. Finally, he looked up. "I've been trying to reach you for weeks." "I know. I needed time." "Are you okay?" he asked, genuine concern in his voice. "I'm getting there," I replied honestly. "It hasn't been easy, but I'm finding my way." He nodded, then took a deep breath. "Mom, what you overheard that day, it wasn't the whole story. Yes, things have been difficult. Yes, sometimes we've felt overwhelmed. But we love you. I love you." Love and resentment can coexist, Tyler. I understand that now. He winced at my directness. "We should have talked to you directly about our concerns instead of talking behind your back. That was wrong, and I'm sorry." I appreciated his apology, but needed more. "Why didn't you tell me about your financial struggles?" He sighed heavily. "Pride, mostly. I didn't want you to worry. Dad always handled problems without burdening others, and I wanted to be like him." "Your father and I were partners," I corrected gently. "He didn't shield me from reality. We faced challenges together." Tyler nodded, acknowledging the truth of this. "I thought I was protecting you. Instead, I created a situation where you didn't understand why we were sometimes stressed or short-tempered." "And Sunrise Gardens?" I asked, referring to the assisted living facility they had toured. He had the grace to look ashamed. "That was premature and completely wrong to discuss without you. We were worried about you alone in that big house, especially after the night you called about the noise. But we should have talked to you about our concerns, not made plans behind your back." We talked for over an hour, well beyond the half hour I had initially agreed to. Tyler explained the financial pressures they had been under since his company downsized and restructured his position. He shared Abigail's struggles with balancing work children and what she perceived as my increasing needs. He admitted that the frequency of my calls and visits had created tension in their marriage. I listened without interrupting, trying to see the situation from their perspective. When he finished, I shared my side, my loneliness, my grief that had never properly healed my fear of being irrelevant now that Robert was gone. "I'm sorry too," I told him. I didn't recognize how dependent I had become. Grief changed me in ways I didn't see clearly until recently. "We could have helped you through it better," Tyler said. "Instead of pulling away when it became too much, we should have been more honest from the beginning." As our coffee cups emptied, I felt a tentative bridge being rebuilt between us. Not the same as before, perhaps stronger in some ways, because it was based on honesty rather than obligation. "The children miss you terribly," Tyler said as we prepared to leave. "Emma asks about you every day." The mention of my grandchildren brought tears to my eyes. I miss them too, so much. "Would you consider coming for dinner this weekend?" he asked cautiously. "Just us, no one else. A fresh start." I considered his invitation. Was I ready to step back into their lives? Had enough healing happened on both sides, I decided it was time to find out. "Sunday," I said. "But Tyler, things need to be different. I'm working on becoming more independent, on building a life that doesn't revolve around being your mother and the children's grandmother. I need you to respect that process." He nodded seriously. "I promise. And Mom, I'm proud of you. Dad would be too." That comment, more than anything else he had said, helped heal a piece of my wounded heart. The dinner that Sunday was awkward at first. Abigail seemed uncertain how to act around me, alternating between excessive politeness and near tears. The children, however, had no such reservations. Emma wrapped her arms around my waist and refused to let go for nearly 5 minutes. Nathan showed me his latest art project from summer camp, a clay sculpture he insisted was a dinosaur, though it resembled nothing in particular. Over a simple meal of roast chicken, we began the delicate process of establishing new patterns. I shared stories about my swimming class and literacy volunteering. Abigail tentatively opened up about her stress at work. We didn't solve everything in one dinner, but we made a start. As the weeks passed, I continued rebuilding my relationship with Tyler's family while maintaining my newfound independence. I visited on scheduled days rather than dropping in unannounced. I kept my late-night calls to true emergencies. When I did spend time with them, I was fully present, rather than needily demanding attention. The most difficult relationship to repair was with Abigail. Her mother's cruel words had cut the deepest, and though Patricia had sent a stilted apology note, the knowledge that Abigail had participated in that conversation created a barrier between us. In late August, Abigail asked if I would meet her for lunch, just the two of us. Over salads at a quiet restaurant, she spoke with a candor that surprised me. "I've been unfair to you," she admitted. "I resented your presence in our lives without acknowledging how much you contribute, how much the children adore you. I blamed you for our stress instead of looking at the bigger picture of our finances and Tyler's job situation. And I inserted myself into your family without respecting your role as the children's mother," I replied. "I gave unsolicited advice and criticized your parenting in subtle ways I didn't even recognize." We both acknowledged truths that were painful but necessary. By the end of lunch, we had reached a new understanding. Not the easy relationship we had pretended to have before, but something potentially stronger, because it was authentic. The most challenging moment came in September, when I encountered Patricia at Emma's soccer game. I had deliberately been avoiding her attending the children's activities only when I knew she wouldn't be there. But on this Saturday, she appeared unexpectedly sitting down on the bleacher behind me. "Diana," she said stiffly. "Patricia," I responded, equally formal. We sat in uncomfortable silence, watching Emma run up and down the field. Finally, Patricia spoke. "My words were unforgivable," she said, her voice low. "I want you to know I regret them deeply." I turned to look at her directly. Why is she even still alive? Those aren't words one easily forgets, Patricia. She had the decency to flinch. "I know. I can offer explanations about being worried for Abigail, about speaking from frustration, but nothing excuses what I said. I can only say I'm truly sorry and ask if, for the sake of our grandchildren, we might find a way forward." I considered her words. The old Diana might have quickly accepted this apology to avoid conflict, to be seen as the forgiving mother-in-law. The new Diana was more discerning about where she placed her trust. "I accept your apology, Patricia," I said finally. "But trust is earned over time, not granted in a moment. For now, let's focus on being civil for the children's sake." She nodded, accepting these terms. We returned our attention to the game, the awkwardness between us not resolved, but acknowledged a starting point for whatever relationship might develop in the future. By the time Thanksgiving approached, marking almost 6 months since the backyard incident, significant healing had occurred on all fronts. I had downsized to a bright modern apartment closer to town. The sale of the family home had reinforced my financial security and eliminated the maintenance that had become burdensome. My calendar remained full with meaningful activities and new friendships. I even had a standing lunch date with a gentleman from my swimming class. Nothing romantic yet, but a pleasant companionship that added dimension to my life. Most importantly, I had reestablished a relationship with Tyler's family based on mutual respect rather than need or obligation. I was no longer the needy mother-in-law or the overbearing grandmother, but a whole person who chose to share my time with them rather than demanding theirs to fill my emptiness. When Tyler called to discuss Thanksgiving plans, assuming they would host as usual, I surprised him with an alternative. "I'd like to host this year," I said, "at my new place." "It's smaller," he said hesitantly. "Are you sure exactly why I want to do it?" I replied. "It's time to create new traditions that fit our current reality, not cling to patterns from the past." He agreed, and I spent the weeks before Thanksgiving planning a meal that would work in my smaller space. I invited not just Tyler's family, but also my new friends from the book club and swimming class. The apartment would be full, but comfortably, so a gathering that represented my new life rather than an attempt to recreate holidays from the past. The day arrived with typical holiday chaos. Abigail brought her famous sweet potato casserole. The children were overexcited and loud. My book club friends brought wine and lively conversation. My swimming friend John helped carve the turkey. There were moments of tension, particularly when Patricia made a comment about the size of my apartment compared to my previous home, but they passed without escalating into conflict. As we sat around the creatively arranged tables, I looked at the blend of family and new friends sharing this meal in my new home and felt a profound sense of gratitude. The journey from that devastating day in the backyard to this moment had been painful but necessary. I had lost illusions but gained authenticity. I had experienced betrayal but found strength. Most importantly, I had rediscovered myself, not as an extension of others, but as a woman of value and purpose in my own right. As I raised my glass to toast the gathered group, I silently thanked the painful words that had started this journey of transformation. Sometimes, the most hurtful truths lead to the most necessary growth. 1 year after that fateful day in Tyler's backyard, my life had transformed in ways I never could have imagined. My apartment had become a true home, filled with selected treasures from my life with Robert, but also new items that reflected the woman I was becoming. The walls, once covered with family photos, now also displayed artwork from local artists I had met through community events, vibrant pieces that energized rather than simply memorialized the past. My volunteer work at the Crisis Line for Seniors had evolved from occasional shifts to a part-time coordinator position. 3 days a week, I guided other volunteers, many of whom were navigating their own transitions through widowhood retirement or empty nest syndrome. The work was emotionally challenging, but deeply fulfilling. Every call where I helped someone find resources or simply provided a compassionate ear reminded me of my value beyond family roles. My social circle had expanded beyond what I could have imagined during those lonely days after Robert's death. The swimming class had led to a regular coffee group that met after our Tuesday sessions. Book club introduced me to women with diverse interests and perspectives. I even joined a hiking group for seniors, discovering a love for nature walks that Robert, with his bad knees, had never been able to share. My relationship with John from the swimming class had deepened into a comfortable companionship. We weren't romantic partners in the traditional sense, but we enjoyed each other's company at concerts, movies, and community events. His presence in my life was a reminder that connection came in many forms, not just through family ties. The most significant transformation, however, was in my relationship with Tyler and his family. What had been broken had been rebuilt not as an exact replica of before, but as something new and potentially stronger. I visited them once a week for Sunday dinner, a standing invitation rather than an obligation. I attended the children's important events, but not every soccer practice or piano recital. When I did spend time with Emma and Nathan, I was fully present, creating memories rather than filling emptiness. Tyler and I had developed a more honest communication style. He no longer shielded me from family challenges, and I no longer pretended everything was fine when it wasn't. When he called to share concerns about Emma's struggles in school or his continuing job uncertainties, I listened without immediately trying to fix things. I offered perspective when asked, but respected that his life was his to manage. Abigail and I had found common ground in unexpected ways. My downsizing inspired her to simplify their own home, and we spent several satisfying weekends sorting through unnecessary possessions and creating more functional spaces. These practical projects gave us neutral territory to rebuild trust and discover shared interests beyond our connection through Tyler. Even Patricia and I had reached a détente. We would never be close, but we had learned to interact with basic civility. At family gatherings, we could now exchange pleasantries and even occasional genuine conversation about the grandchildren or current events without underlying tension. Perhaps most exciting was the trip I was planning, a 2-week tour of the national parks of the American West. It was a journey Robert and I had always talked about, but never taken, always finding reasons to postpone it until someday. Now I was going with 2 women from my book club, an adventure that represented my embrace of new experiences rather than just clinging to old dreams. As I packed for this upcoming trip, Emma and Nathan came to spend the afternoon with me. At 8.5, Emma was becoming quite the young lady, thoughtful and perceptive beyond her years. Nathan, now 7, remained exuberant and curious about everything. While Nathan played a game on my tablet, Emma helped me fold clothes for my suitcase. She picked up a brightly colored scarf I had recently purchased specifically for the trip. "Grandma," she said hesitantly, "can I ask you something?" "Of course, sweetheart," I replied, sitting beside her on the bed. "Are you still sad about the bad day?" I knew immediately what she meant. Children absorbed far more than adults realized, and though she had been playing inside during the backyard confrontation, she had clearly sensed the seismic shift it had caused in our family. "What bad day do you mean?" I asked, giving her the opportunity to express her understanding. "The day when everyone was upset, when you didn't come back for a long time." Her serious eyes studied my face. "Daddy said some grown-ups said mean things that hurt your feelings." I considered how to respond in a way that was honest, but age-appropriate. "Yes, that was a difficult day. I was very sad for a while. But you know what? Sometimes hard things help us grow in ways we needed to." She considered this. "Like how I was scared of swimming, but now I'm on the swim team. Exactly like that?" I smiled. "Sometimes we have to go through scary or painful things to become stronger." "So you're not sad anymore?" she persisted. "Not in the same way," I told her. I learned a lot about myself during that time. I learned that I'm strong and capable. I learned that it's important to have my own friends and activities, not just be grandma all the time. And I learned that when people love each other, they can work through hard things together. Nathan, apparently listening while playing his game, looked up. "Mommy says you're more fun now," he announced with characteristic directness. "Nathan," Emma hissed, embarrassed by his candor. I laughed. "It's okay, Emma. Nathan's right in his own way. I probably am more fun now because I'm happier. When people are always worried about being loved or needed, they can't fully enjoy the time they have with others." Emma nodded sagely, as if I had confirmed something she had already intuited. "I like that you do cool things now, like your trip and your hiking and stuff. My friend Zoe's grandma just bakes cookies and watches TV." "There's nothing wrong with baking cookies and watching TV," I said gently. "But I'm enjoying doing some new things too. When I grow up," Emma declared, "I'm going to be like you. I'll have adventures even when I'm old." I laughed again, not offended by her characterization of 68 as old. "That's a wonderful plan, Emma. Life can be an adventure at any age if you're open to new experiences." That evening, after Tyler picked up the children, I sat on my small balcony watching the sunset. I thought about Emma's question and my response. Was I still sad about the bad day? The honest answer was both yes and no. Yes, there was still a small ache when I remembered those cruel words. Yes, I sometimes still felt a flicker of insecurity when interacting with Abigail's family. Yes, there were nights when I missed the unquestioning closeness I had once believed I had with Tyler. But those feelings were overshadowed by gratitude for the transformation that painful day had triggered. If I hadn't overheard those hurtful words, I might have continued my path of increasing dependency. I might never have rediscovered my strength, my capacity for joy, independent of family validation. I might have remained a diminished version of myself, defined solely by my relationship to others. Instead, I had found a new identity that incorporated but wasn't limited to being a mother and grandmother. I had discovered that life after 65 could be a time of growth and new experiences, not just a waiting room for the inevitable end. I had learned that true love, whether for family or friends, required boundaries and respect, not just emotional need. Most importantly, I had reclaimed the woman Robert had loved, the independent, capable Diana, who had somehow gotten lost in grief. In finding her again, I honored his memory far more than I ever had through dependence and sorrow. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, I felt a profound sense of peace. Life would continue to bring challenges. Relationships would require ongoing effort to maintain healthy boundaries, and there would be more losses to face as I aged. But I now face the future with confidence rather than fear, with anticipation rather than dread. That terrible question, why is she even still alive, now had a clear answer. I was alive to experience joy and connection. I was alive to contribute to others through my volunteer work. I was alive to explore the world through travel and new activities. I was alive to love my family in healthier, more balanced ways. I was alive because life at any age offered opportunities for growth and meaning if we were brave enough to embrace them. Have you ever experienced a painful truth that ultimately led to personal growth? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. Remember that sometimes our greatest transformations come from our deepest wounds. If this story resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe to hear more stories of resilience and renewal. Thank you for listening, and remember, it's never too late to rewrite your story and reclaim your strength.